Well, to delve deeper into the politics in the United States, I'm joined now by Tom Switzer from the US Studies Centre and Tim Lynch from Melbourne University. Thanks to you both for your time this afternoon. Tim Lynch, first to you, just on the polls, as Paul Steinhauser was talking there, about them not moving so much over the past few months. What about in the key swing states, as he mentioned there? Can you see any advantage for either party?
Well, I think in some ways the swing states, their effect is exaggerated. If someone wins this race by 3 points, that will be reflected in the swing states. If we think there are 5 states on which hangs the election, winning those and those only does not make you president. But it's the most obvious way of measuring the performance of the candidates. It's where they spend the most money. But much of our discussion is going to be short-circuited by the fact that the polls are giving us no clear indication of who the people are going to pick, and the swing states don't provide much more certainty when it comes to that prediction.
Tom Switzer, why aren't we getting much of an indication? Why have the polls not changed over the past few months? Is that a sign that people aren't really engaging yet, for example?
Well, bear in mind, July in the United States is a bit like January in Australia. It's the dead of summer, so a lot of Americans are on holiday, they're on vacation, and they're not really focused on politics. I think the time to really focus on the polls will really be after the Labor Day holiday that officially ends the summer vacation, and that's in the first week of September, which coincides with the end of both the Republican and Democratic conventions in late August, early September. That's when the ball game really starts. So I don't take these polls all too seriously, although, to be fair, I think it's all the evidence is clear that in those swing states to which Tim just referred, the president does have a marginal advantage. But as I say, 4 months is a long time, and I wouldn't take the polls too seriously until September and October.
What about the issues that Barack Obama's camp has been attacking the Romney camp on, and Mitt Romney in particular, about his tax returns and, as we heard there, his leadership of Bain Capital? Dr. Lynch, what do you make of that? Are those sorts of attacks likely to stick in the end?
Well, here's his problem, it seems to me. They're going after Romney because he's rich. The whole point of the president, many middle-class Americans, and that's an overwhelming majority of the people that identify that way, want a president that's rich because he provides the best plan, they would suppose, for making them rich as well. So going after the guy on the basis of the fact that he's run a company successfully, ruthlessly even, is not necessarily going to play to Obama's strengths. Obama, remember, has not run anything until he was given the White House job, unless you include the Harvard Law Review. Whereas Mitt Romney, although he's not everyone's choice, certainly on the Republican side, he has delivered. He's run a state. He's got a pre-presidential record that Obama doesn't have, and Obama has to run against the rather meagre return of his 3 years against the much more studied business record of Romney, the challenger.
Yeah, Tom Switzer, do you think that Mitt Romney should release those tax returns?
Look, he probably will, because various Conservative supporters, such as the National Review magazine, have come out in the last day or so encouraging him to do so. But look, I agree with Tim on that fundamental point. I mean, the president and his advisors seem to think that Mitt Romney's financial success will somehow be a political weakness. You know, they want to portray him as Mr. Monopoly Man without the top hat and cane. And that he's some sort of elitist who is out of tune with ordinary Americans. But look, history shows that class warfare does not really play well with middle America. And I think there's a growing suspicion that this is a desperate tactic by the Democrats to portray the Republican candidate like this, and just a way of covering up President Obama's record. I mean, the fact is he's not going out on the hustings defending his signature legislative initiatives, such as the healthcare plans and the stimulus package, both of which are unpopular, and in the case of the stimulus at least, have not really worked.
No,
Tim Lynch.
I'm sorry to this outbreak of consensus on the panel, but I think Tom is absolutely right there. That difference, I think, particularly with a European electorate, is that you can poke these sorts of class envy buttons in a way that you can't in the United States, because they all aspire to get ahead. They all believe in economic mobility. So to knock a guy because he's done well that's in some way un-American. And that's why I think Obama, despite being a remarkable electoral campaigner, this is a very dubious tactic, I think, at this stage of the campaign.
What about Ben Bernankes' comments, Tom Switzer? What do you make of them? What's the takeout in terms of the presidential race?
Well, the takeout is this, that the great threat to the American economy is less the Eurozone crisis, which has been the conventional wisdom for the last 6 months, and more this, I think some political pundits are calling it tax Armageddon on January 1, 2013. This will be the time frame for the one of the biggest tax hikes in American history, $500 billion in a tax hike, which most economists will argue is a precursor to a double-dip recession. The Democrats, the Liberal Democrats, are treating this as, in a way, a bit like what the Tea Party Republicans treated the negotiations over the debt default last summer. That is, go off the fiscal cliff. They're prepared not to renew the Bush-era tax cuts as a way of trying to reduce the size of the debt. Whereas the Republicans 12 months ago wanted to slash the size of government dramatically and default on the debt as a way of dealing with the debt crisis. Both the Liberal Democrats this year and the Tea Party Republicans last year represent the two extremes, if you like, of national debate. But nevertheless, there is a very real threat that those tax cuts from the Bush era will not be renewed on January 1. And if that is indeed the case, there's not a great deal that the Federal Reserve can do in terms of monetary policy. The monetary policy cupboard is bare. It comes down to fiscal policy. And if the government is not going to preside over tax cuts, then the chances of a double-dip recession will only go higher.
And if that does happen, Tim Lynch, a double-dip recession or perhaps a worsening of the jobs figures or a lack of them getting better, what does that mean for Barack Obama?
Well, it means he's dead in the water. I mean, this is, of course, maybe mute because he may well lose in November, so what happens in 13 becomes Romney's problem. But I think he's trapped in an ideological system, whether he likes it or not. America is not initially primarily a technocratic political order. It believes in ideas and the clash of ideas. So all economics, all budgets, they're all filtered through an ideological lens in a way that in Europe and perhaps also in Australia that they're not. And he's playing that game at the moment quite poorly. He's claiming he's technocratic. He doesn't have an ideology. It's the wicked ideological Republicans that are ruining the United States. That won't play well in November, I don't think.
Yeah, no, I think Tim's right, actually. I'd have to make this fundamental point, Dave, just quickly. This campaign is really about two philosophies, and Tim just harped on that, and this doesn't get enough play. The Democrats will run a let government solve it, a liberalism, whereas Romney will make the case for lower government and reform government so that the country doesn't go bankrupt, if you like. And it gets back to a very prominent comment that the President made just recently. If you've got a business, you didn't build that, somebody else made that happen, meaning the government. So this will be a real clash of philosophy in the next 4 months.
Yes.
What about the fact that Barack Obama had to take some time off the campaign just in the last couple of days to deal with Syria and other foreign affairs matters? Tim Lynch, does that put him behind having to deal with the actual workings of being president?
No, I don't think so, David. I mean, increasingly his strong suit, and something that Romney obviously can't match him on because he's not been president, is foreign policy. And he's managed to end or claim credit for the ending of the Iraq war. Afghanistan, after a surge by Obama, is now being scaled back, and he killed Osama bin Laden. So I don't, in some ways, and this is not to be too cynical, I hope, what he wants is a foreign policy crisis so he can display some presidential leadership, because on the economy, on domestic politics, he's looking in a very dubious situation.
Yeah, and Tom Switzer, has there been much focus at all on the international matters, or is this so far shaping up to be a domestic race?
Yeah, I think it'll be more about the economy, a bit like 1992 when Bill Clinton defeated a foreign policy president in George H.W. Bush. Barack Obama does have much better national security credentials than the Republican challenger. The polls give him a 15-point lead in national security. But look, bear in mind, on Syria, I don't think the president is keen to get involved. No-fly zones, not comparable to Libya under Gaddafi. Funding the opposition and supporting the opponents is fraught with danger because it could be a case of supporting a group that's in cahoots with Al-Qaeda or Islamists. And the other important point from Obama's perspective is that there's no UN Security Council consensus. It's not just the Chinese and the Russians, but it's also the French under Hollande. They are in no mood to get involved in another military intervention in the Middle East.
OK, Tom Switzer and Dr Tim Lynch, we do thank you both very much for your insight this afternoon. Fascinating stuff. And thanks for your company on Lunchtime Agenda.